Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Got another review today because actually I'm a little late. I finished this book about like a week and a half ago, but I've been pretty busy with work and other things. So I'm just now getting around to recording this review. It is going to be my second square for the fantasy bingo, and the square that I was aiming for with this book was the reference square. And what that means is the book has to have in it like a map, a calendar, a glossary, anything like that. In the book that I chose, the hard mode square or hard mode for that square would be if it has two references or more. And Blacktongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman has two references at the front. It has a map of the world and a calendar. I will be honest, I don't think I looked at either of them while I was reading, but it's still helpful to those who are more interested in that kind of stuff. I've never really been one to look at references unless they're in like beautiful color or anything like that. I don't remember Blacktongue Thief having colorful references, anything like that. But still, Blacktongue Thief is a fantasy book. Just a brief synopsis: it is a fantasy book. It's an adventure story that follows our main protagonist, Kench. Kench Shanak, I believe, is how you say it. I didn't really listen to the audio except for like a little bit. But Kench Shanak, he is a thief who owes a lot of money to his guild. And because of that, because he was in so much debt, he has to go and do a job for them. And his job is going to be to follow Galva, a very powerful magical being with a killer bird. That's all I'm going to say about that. But it's going to follow Galva and Kench throughout this entire novel and their adventures to try to get to a far-off kingdom to try to save a princess. Oh, hello. My cat is now screaming at me. She wants attention. She wants to be in my lap. So maybe you'll see Momo in a little bit. But the entire novel is going to follow those two on this grand adventure, and that's going to be one of the positives. Immediately, if you were looking for an adventure story, you might really enjoy Blacktongue Thief. I'm going to go ahead and get one thing out of the way first after that brief synopsis. A lot of reviewers say when they are very positive and they speak very highly about a book, they might say something like, "Oh, I read this book at the right time, at the perfect time." And this is a good book, but I feel like I read it at the absolute worst time. Goodbye, Momo. She would have gotten too much in the way. But I read this book at the absolute worst time. I feel like, which is disappointing. I was distracted throughout the last month with work, grad school, and other things in my life, and I wasn't able to give this book the attention that it deserves. And it happens. Not every book is going to be an all-time favorite, and maybe even though I wasn't able to give it the attention that it deserves, maybe there are some reasons for that, and I'll talk about that with this book. But immediately, like I always start, I want to start with positives about Blacktongue Thief. First of all, it is, again, an adventure story. I was really looking for an adventure. I see there's a lot of discourse around YouTube right now about, the fantasy genre. The epic fantasies are starting to disappear, and I think this is an epic. It is a, long, well, it's not too long, but it is a story about walking from one area to another with a bunch of different characters making up the cast, different locations and settings, and really just a grand adventure. That's, something that I think a lot of people have been looking for. And so I think you should check out Blacktongue Thief because of that. Speaking of the characters, there are a lot of great characters, I would say. Kench and Galva especially. Noragal, who is a witch, is the best way to describe her. Malk, he's pretty cool. You'll meet him about halfway through the novel. I'm not going to say too much about him. And Bully Boy as well. And then another character, but I do not want to spoil that character's involvement either. Bully Boy is the cat who shows up. Speaking of cats. Some of the characters, there are other characters as well. Some of them don't really spend as much time on this journey as maybe you would like, but that's because things actually happen. There are consequences throughout this novel for choices and, things going awry, which is a good thing as well. The story, the characters do face troubles and they do face consequences. Another positive I would say about this book is it's very unique, whether that be the voice. Kench has a very unique narrative style. Christopher Buehlman did a great job writing from Kinch's point of view. Um, and again, I listened to the audiobook a little bit, and he is a very great narrator. I just don't do audiobooks all that much. It's better for me to read with paper because I'm on a screen a lot of times anyway. But a very unique voice that I think a lot of people enjoy. Kinch brings a lot of comedy with his storytelling. So Whalen did a great job making Kinch a very unique character. It's also a very unique world and setting. This world, it's like, I don't remember the exact years. It's like 6 years after a giant war. The Daughters' War, that's going to be the title of the prequel, where the goblins invaded this land and killed pretty much a lot of people and killed all the horses. That's going to be a big deal, but I don't want to say too much about that. So a very unique world, a very unique land, a very unique setting, a bunch of different settings as well. Again, this isn't an adventure, so we'll spend time, on the ocean. We'll spend time in the mountains. We'll spend time in the swamps. But great, great location and set pieces with this. It did feel like the world was lived in. It did feel like it wasn't empty just save, our main characters. There were citizens about. There were other people about, also going about their daily lives, and I thought that was, well done. But I do want to talk about maybe some negatives for a little bit. Speaking of the unique world and the unique voice, it might aggravate some readers because Kinch does like to tell a story, and he does like to go on and on and on and on. And for the first 100 pages or so, it did feel like a history lesson where there's a lot of exposition about the world and about the history of the world and about the religions in the world. And there's a lot to get through. And there's a lot to, you got to try to latch yourself onto some of the information. You got to really try to focus on it. And maybe that's why I also struggled with this book at first. Again, I was distracted in, my work and grad school and all that. And this book didn't really help with that because there's a lot of information going around outside of my reading, and there's a lot of information in this book as well. And maybe that is partially why I read this book at the wrong time. I probably needed something a little bit simpler. Even though this isn't a difficult book, there's just a lot of information. I think that might turn some people off from reading this book. But also I don't want to say a big negative, but maybe a big disappointment from my point of view would be kind of the last 10%, 10% or so, where, the story builds and builds and builds about a certain threat. And I don't want to say what that threat is. And I was the entire time like, okay, how are they going to deal with this threat? How are they going to deal with this moment in this area? And it's probably the least amount of time spent on a location. It's at the very end. And that was aggravating, at least from my point of view, because it is kind of my fault. Maybe I had the wrong expectations, but, I was thinking one thing was going to happen and it didn't happen. And it was very quick. Again, it was this big build up and a very quick ending. But some people might like that. It is going to be part of a trilogy, so maybe later books in the series will pick up where it left off. Well, I hope, especially because it did leave off on a cliffhanger. But maybe future books will build up that threat even more, and I think explore that even more, because Buehlman has a very deep and very rich world to build from this book, and I'm very excited to see what else he can come up with. The prequel, The Daughters' War, comes out, I think, later in the summer, and I am going to pick it up. This was my second Buehlman book, and I enjoyed, what is it called? Between Two Fires. I enjoyed that one a lot, except one part, but I'm not going to talk about it. And I really enjoyed this book. It's not going to become an all-time favorite. That's okay. It may not even make my top 10 list at the end of the year, but that's also okay. It was a solid book. I gave it a B. Nothing wrong with a B. I liked it. But maybe when I read The Daughters' War, maybe I'll read that book at the perfect time. But that's all I got. That's 2 squares down in Fantasy Bingo. I don't know my next square yet. I was planning on reading Sword of Kagan or Kaigan. I can't remember. But I really don't want to do a large epic at the moment or a large fantasy book. I'm saving those for the summer when I am off of work. But But that's all I got right now. If you ever read the Blacktongue Thief, let me know what you thought about it. I'm interested to see what other people thought. But like, subscribe, do whatever. Peace.